Holy shit, we're live. It is Stick to Hockey Live, episode, I think it's 74. I got to change that. But anyway, I'm a little rusty. It's Jason Martinez, and there he is coming to you from the Great White North. It is Anthony DeMarco. What's going on, Ant? Long time no
Y-
speak.
Yeah, just it's been a minute for sure. So much so that your hair's grown out. I'm just fucking with you.
I
But
wish.
yeah, my hair's definitely grown out. I need to get to the barber soon. But no, yeah, obviously our respective schedules have been upside down a bit, but it's looking like we could get this back on a weekly format, which I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to.
We were healthy scratched a few weeks.
Hmm.
Boy, that's like benching or healthy scratch is like the term of the season in the NHL. Flyers have had their share, obviously with Frost and other guys being benched in game. But Jesus, Line being healthy scratched, $8.7 million sitting in the press box on Sunday at Wells Fargo. He's not happy about it. He's embarrassed. Gaudreau getting benched. I mean, Huberto, it's all over the league. What the hell's going on?
Nature of the league, man. A lot of big contracts getting handed out over the last several years, and a lot of guys not living up to it. I mean, who would have thought that Johnny Gaudreau wouldn't have the same impact in Columbus as he did in Calgary alongside Kachuk and Lindholm? I mean, I
Man.
think, I mean, you go back 17 months to Gaudreau mania in Philadelphia. And one of the non moves that really got the ball rolling for, I guess, the eventual Chuck Fletcher firing. But I mean, I think we could all collectively look back and breathe a sigh of relief that Chuck Fletcher elected not to pay the necessary money to alleviate that cap space and hand out a 7-year monster deal to Johnny Gaudreau, especially given the way things have transpired over the last 17 months and given the way Gaudreau has played in Columbus. And them embracing a rebuild, probably a massive bullet dodge there from Chuck Fletcher.
Yeah, what the hell's going to happen in Columbus? I mean, they finished in the bottom spot last year. They added all these D pieces. They have some talent there. They get Fantilli. I think's been a big positive for them. But geez, they lost 9 in a row. It's a mess. The Babcock debacle right out of the gate in the offseason and didn't even make it to training camp. Now Pascal Vincent is trying to piss on a lot of fences and show who's boss and benching key guys. I mean, where the hell's this going? I imagine Yarmo's going to be out.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a long time coming there. Like Yarmo and John Davidson, although Davidson left for I believe 2-3
Rangers.
years to go, yeah, to the
Yeah.
Rangers to take on the president role there. But it's been about a decade there. Like the last GM was Scott Housen, and you're going back a while. And that's a very hands-off ownership group in Columbus, but it feels like it's going to start coming to a head. And look, Columbus has done a lot of good things, I think, like in the draft for sure, like Ken Johnson, Adam Fantilli, Trey Fix-Wolanski, who actually just went back to the AHL today. But it's so stale, and it felt like pre John Tortorella they were irrelevant, and post John Tortorella they
Yeah.
have gone back to irrelevance. And I mean, I don't think it's all doom and gloom there, but it's kind of they're in an organization that you don't really know which way they're going. Are they going east? Are they going west? Rebuild, competitive? You would have thought they would have been moving into more of a competitive window with the additions of Severson and Ivan Provorov, Adam Fantilli coming in, but it's just not working for them, and it just feels like they need an organizational facelift.
Yeah, they need an organizational philosophy. They have talent there, but none of it fits together. And that just shows you that it's not just talent that wins. Speaking of winning, Ant, the Flyers are on a heater right now, a 5-game win streak. And these teams they've beaten, they're not chicken shit teams. Like you look at, they lose to San Jose. I think San Jose was 0-10-1 at the time. They get their first win against the Flyers in that 2-1 game. And I didn't think the Flyers played particularly poorly in that game. I think they got goalied a little bit, but ultimately they handed San Jose. San Jose got their first win against them. But since then, they go to Anaheim. They avenge the loss here at Wells Fargo Center, and they get a 6-3 win in Anaheim. Anaheim's a much better team than we thought maybe coming into this year. Then LA, you go into the Kings, and you're on a back-to-back, and they're not. And you come away with a 4-2 win with Cal Peterson, of all people, in that against his former team. Then you come home from the trip, and then you go back out, and you face Carolina down in Raleigh. You win that game 3-1. Then you come home, and that first home game after a trip's always tough. and they beat the Vegas Golden Knights, and then they take care of business against Columbus. A 5-game win streak. Did you think we didn't have any 5-game win streaks last year? Did you think that this was possible, and in particular this early in the season?
I mean, they've definitely shocked us, and it's not just like them, winning based off of like a high shooting percentage or great goaltending. What's that combined stat people use? PDO, which would often suggest maybe an unsustainable formula to winning. But I think what we're seeing with the Flyers is that their underlying process is really good. I believe Jay Fresh put it out there. I think it was about a week ago. He put out like a stat card, and if the Flyers had a like even a middle of the road power play, they would probably even have more wins so far this season. But they're doing it just with really sound system play at 5-on-5. And they're getting some really good play from obviously Travis Sanheim, who, in my opinion, has been their MVP so far this season. A guy who I believe internally is as intouchable as you can get. Obviously, his no trade clause has a bit to do with that. But I mean, I think that they were happily proven wrong for trying to trade him this summer. Obviously, Travis Konechny slowed down a bit recently, but he's led the way offensively. Really nice season so far from Joel Farabee. I think that process-wise, he's probably been their best player and a point behind Travis Konechny for the team league amongst forwards and points. Owen Tippett has really picked it up. Maybe my article about his extension maybe coming down the pike soon, lit a fire under his ass. And I mean, Cam Atkinson, he's putting up points, haven't loved his game, but points are points, and he's done so in 13 points through 18 games. And then probably the biggest shock through how many games they're in right now, 18 games through, I think has been Sean Walker. And we could really talk about him that, he came over as almost like a throw-in in the Ivan Provorov 3-way trade from the Los Angeles Kings. And he's a guy that I think, save for Travis Sanheim, has probably been your best defenseman. A right shot guy, has plugged the top 4 hole that was left open with Rasmus Ristolainen on the shelf for the entire season to this point. And I think that nobody has really expected what we've gotten from Sean Walker, including those within the Flyers organization.
Yeah, he's a guy has a career high of 5 goals. He did it twice in LA, and he's going to well surpass that this season. It's amazing. I was talking about this on Flyers Daily, that the Flyers have gotten 5 total goals from the combination of Lawton, Forster, Frost, and Cates. And they've gotten 33 combined goals from Konechny, Farabee, Tippett, and Atkinson. And, one of the most amazing stats, I think, this season, because you've been through it, Flyer fans have been through, starts to games for what seems like a decade, and the team always trailing and chasing the scoreboard. They have the most first period goals in the NHL. And when they score first, they have a 10-1 record, which leads the NHL. Where the heck did that come from?
It kind of goes to show that a lot of the problems that we've seen with the Philadelphia Flyers, maybe going back to, I was going to say post-pandemic, but there were a lot of problems that were going on before the pandemic as well, before Alain Vigneault temporarily righted them, before the pandemic shut down in 2019-20. But it was almost like a mindset thing, that you would see the Flyers play games where they would just get blown out of the building and absolutely dummied and not be able to just play a sound defensive game or just a sound all-around game. But even though you had really good players and really good talent. And the way that I've seen it now is that even though on paper maybe you don't have as much talent as past years, you have a bunch of guys who are buying in and a bunch of guys who are all pulling in the same direction. And, a lot was made of them, moving on from a lot of the problem children this past summer, and Kevin Hayes and Tony DeAngelo, Ivan Provorov. And then you go back even to the summer of 2021, where you move on from Shane Gostisbehere and Jake Voracek. I'm not going to dub Claude Giroux as a problem child, but he was obviously a big voice in that locker room, the captain for almost a decade. And it's the first season, and we saw the transition going on last year, but this is like the first year where it feels like that Giroux era Band-Aid has been completely ripped off. Yeah. Because you kind of had the holdover of like Kevin Hayes, who was like a bridge to that era. And Ivan Provorov was kind of a bridge to that era as well. But now you move on from those two guys who both wore letters in the past for this team and had them subsequently removed last year. And it just feels like a completely new era. Like for me, like I look at a guy like Travis Sanheim and I'll eat my crow on it. I never thought that he had this type of game in him. I
Me
was
neither.
always on the fence of beating that Ivan Provorov was the better defenseman and that Ivan Provorov suffered from not having a legit top pair, but I was wrong. Travis Sanheim has not only exceeded better in Ivan Provorov's role, but he's playing on his off wing or his offside rather. And to me, like I know John Tortorella has been very, I don't want to say heroic, but very stern on the fact of not giving out letters and anointing a firm leadership group. But I mean, to me, I think Travis Sanheim should have a letter because he's someone that I heard as early today wants to be in Philadelphia
Yeah.
and is someone that really takes pride in the opportunity that he's been given and not just given, taken this year. Because I
Yeah.
don't think it was a slam dunk that he was going to be your number one top pairing defenseman, but he's taken it. He's on a long-term contract that, hey, if he's playing at this level or even 90% of this level, $6.25 million is going to be a very good bargain for him.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm looking at Travis Sanheim as a guy who probably should be wearing a letter sometime soon and someone who was probably buried in past years behind Provorov, behind D'Angelo last year, but has really blown the doors off this year.
You know, the thing about him, like I talked to Torts this morning for Hockey and Hounds, taped an interview, and there was a play. I think it was in the Columbus game in the first period. He's on that right side and he gets the puck just at the top of the circle in the D zone and decides he wants to rush it. And there are guys literally hanging off him and just running into him. I said it was like watching the old Sports Center highlights of Chris Berman talking about Marshawn Lynch going beast mode or Jerome Bettis. Poof, poof, and he just keeps on trucking. The way he attacks plays now physically, I'm not saying he's running guys through the boards and a big hitter, but the way he's willing to just plow ahead and be aggressive and decisive, I did not think this level of play was there either. I really didn't. He put on 20 pounds and he carries it, and you can tell like the guy's body language is so much more aggressive and confident.
Yeah, and it was, and even for me, like I'll eat my crow, but on a certain level, like I based off my opinion off of Sanheim of how he played in the playoffs in 2020 when he was pushed around against the New York Islanders
Yeah.
and he hadn't filled into that big frame yet. Like he's a really big guy, but he just hadn't filled up with muscle. But now like I was talking to someone with the Flyers a few weeks ago, and I said that the way that he's playing now physically and the way he skates reminds me of a Braden Coburn. And Braden Coburn was a big dude. And
Yeah,
like
he
he
was.
was not to be trifled with down low. And now that you're seeing Sanheim, use his size, it's a very Coburn-esque type of style. But what this one person said to me is just like he's Coburn, but much better with the puck. And that's what's separating Sanheim from being Braden Coburn, who in my mind was a 3-4, and Sanheim, who this year is playing like a 1-2, because Sanheim's always had that puck IQ. He's always been able to move the puck up ice, good decision making. His problem was when he would get caught down low and he would kind of get pushed around a lot of the time. But now that he's, bulked up a bit, he's added that element to his game. You still have the skating, you still have the IQ, you still have the puck abilities, and you're seeing him really blossom here, all on the right side, which coincidentally enough, Braden Coburn excelled on the right side as well, years alongside Kimmo Timonen. And so that's what we're seeing right now, in my opinion. And look, we see late bloom defensemen all the time in the NHL. And Sanheim drafted in 2014, coming up on 27 years old shortly. And, maybe I'm not sitting here saying he's going to win a Norris, although, I mean, he's probably top 10 in voting right now if we're talking today. But I mean, if he could be a stable right side defenseman for this top pair for years to come, it's going to make their outlook on the back end a hell of a lot easier as they try and find out what they have with Andre York and probably eventually an Oliver Bonk.
Yeah, and as you mentioned before, the cost certainty with him for a long period of time. Did you see the quote he had when he was asked about Sean Walker that Sanheim hadn't?
No,
I think it was a Charlie O'Connor
see that,
story. He said, asked about Sean Walker. He said, I wouldn't say that he goes overboard. I think it's more he knows he could do better from when he was in LA. I think it's a good thing. He said, it's good when guys recognize their mistakes. I've seen it the other way where guys don't ever recognize their mistakes. And then they think they played a perfect game. I think he does a great job recognizing that. And like Tort said, he's very passionate and competitive. That's about Walker. But pretty interesting who he's talking about there, about guys recognizing their mistakes and thinking they played a perfect game. I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, 100%. And
Yeah, it's
look,
Ivan
I
Provorov.
think like I actually did a story on Sanheim a few weeks back, and I think we all know who he's alluding to there, probably Ivan Provorov. And
Mhm.
look, I've been a staunch defender of Ivan Provorov for a long time. I have his jersey hanging right there. Right there, I have an Ivan Provorov jersey. But I mean, the proof is in the pudding here, and I'll eat my words. Like Ivan Provorov was a failure, all in all, as a top pairing defenseman here when the dust settled. And I thought a lot of that was attributed to the partner. And I do think that is true, but I think that what you're seeing with Sanheim is the what's going on between the ears and the accountability, and how Sanheim was almost traded away and would have been traded away had it not been for Torrey Krug not waiving his no trade clause, and took that and used it as like fuel to better
Yeah,
his game. And he acknowledged that, you know what, I'm a good skater. I have good puck abilities. I'm a good second pair defenseman. But if I want to take the next step here, I'm gonna have to be able to change the way that I play in my own end and down low. And when I spoke to him for my story, like he really kind of took it personally that maybe that contract, and this was just the sense I got,
yeah,
that that contract was hanging over him like it was a bad contract. Because you see Mackenzie Weegar get that contract, and that was pretty much the bar setter for
that was market
Sanheim.
value. Yeah,
It was the market value. And even if Sanheim would have just stayed what he was as just a solid second pair defenseman, $6.25 million over the
yeah,
next 8 years is a fair contract. And I think that it kind of upset him that not only did they try and trade him, but a lot of people, myself included, were saying, like, man, now you're shackled to this guy for 8 years, a second pair defenseman. And he's gone out, he went in the gym, he declined his invite to the Worlds, and he really focused on the training, tried to replicate the training of the Flyers at Performance Center at his home gym.
yeah.
And he put in the work, and now you're seeing it. And he's just a completely different defenseman, both stylistically, I find at times, in his own end
And
specifically,
right here.
and upstairs. And I
Yep.
think that's why, like, and I don't mean to beat this horse again. And obviously, I'm not in the room. I don't know how the dynamic is, but if there's a next guy to wear a letter like Ivan Provorov had on his jersey, I think it should go to Travis Sanheim.
Yeah, the thing is too, I remember when that deal didn't happen, and I said at the time, either here or on Flyers Daily, sometimes the best trades are the ones you don't make. And imagine if, a 30, what a 32, 33-year-old Torrey Krug's here and Sanheim's doing this in St. Louis, and you're going, what did you do? Like, why didn't that flourish here, number one? And, did you give up too early on a guy that had the new contract? Let's talk about Walker. Because you've mentioned we're going to get to Tippett and the extension of what you reported there, but let's talk about Walker because this is a conundrum wrapped in a riddle. Walker comes in, he's been obviously more than anybody thought. In LA, he was probably, Doughty's there. He's the right side guy. When you watch LA, you're watching Doughty. So he comes here and he's just been a revelation. He really pushes the pace. He's good defensively, but he can really work in transition well. I think he fits the system that they changed kind of to this year perfectly. But what do you do here? You got a guy in a final year. He can yield you something in return. I think he's going to be able to yield you a lot for a couple of reasons. Obviously, the level of play, the fact that he's a right shot guy, the unicorn, and he's not making any dough. He's not making any money. So he'll fit on anybody's cap. So what do you do in this situation? Do you extend him? Do you trade him and get some assets in return and and then just sign him in the offseason if you can? What's the answer here when it comes to Walker? I know they don't have to decide now, but what do you do here?
Well, I was talking to someone about Sean Walker earlier today, actually, several people. And the interesting thing about Walker is like he's not ancient. He's 29 years old. And I mean, that's not young, but he's someone that could probably help your blue line in a top four capacity, theoretically, for another 3, 4 years. And the other part about this is that if you trade Sean Walker, what are you going to get for him? Now, I think that if some team comes along and they're going to say, we'll give you a first round pick, I think you kind of have to do it given the nature of where the Flyers are at organizationally. It's just a no brainer. But even if you get into the second round pick territory, is it worth it to move on from a guy like Sean Walker, given
Two and a
your lack of,
prospect.
pardon me?
Like two and a prospect.
Yeah, like I don't think it's as, and look, I equated his, not stylistically, but what he would bring to your team, his tier level, to like peak Justin Braun, like a
Mm.
third pair, 4 or 5 defenseman who will maybe fetch you a third, fourth round pick at the trade deadline. He's not that. And I think that him battling injuries last year really kind of made his value foggy for us. And the fact that he was just a throw in to make the dollars work in that 3-way trade that saw Provorov end up in Columbus. But he's come in here. He's been amazing with the puck. He's been good in his own end. Like I said, save for Travis Sanheim, he's been their best defenseman. And they don't have many right shot options here. Like, look, Belpedio, he's not an NHL defenseman on a consistent basis. Ristolainen, I mean, I guess you're locked into him for another 3 years beyond this year, but beyond Risto, like they don't really have any right shot options as consistent NHLers. Ronnie Addard, who knows how far away he is from the NHL. Oliver Bonk, their first round pick from this past season, is a guy who maybe they expect to take on that role. But is Risto going to play to the same level as Walker is right now? Is Ronnie Addard going to be anything more than a third pairing guy? How far away is Oliver Bonk? Like, could Sean Walker be kind of like
Bridge.
the bridge to an Oliver Bonk? and to this point, you also don't want to cut out the legs from a team that's legitimately playing well.
Yeah.
Now, look, I think that they've considered keeping him. I mean, maybe a 3-4 year contract. Who knows? Maybe it's a 1 or 2 year contract. Maybe he wants to test UFA. But I don't think this is a scenario where Danny Briere and company are just going to be saying, yeah, come get him for any price, third round pick, and we'll give him away. If you come along with a first round pick or a second round pick and a decent prospect, I think the Flyers have to listen there. But I don't think this is any more like a situation where you're going to flip Sean Walker for whatever you can get because he's proven to be that valuable.
I think you nailed it with what you said, in the sense, I was talking to somebody about this today at the Flyers practice. We got this notion of, the rebuild. Is the rebuild still on? They got a record of 10-7-1, and they're not going to do this properly. I'll read an email I got from a guy in just a second. But, Danny Briere said ultimately the players will decide the pace of the rebuild. And right now the players are playing well and they're winning. It's going to be a long season. There's 82 games. You cannot measure it on the first 18 and say, well, they're ready. So there's going to be pain that's going to come. Torts has talked about that. But what does it signal to the players in the room? Because I think the players, when they heard the term rebuild, they're like, oh, yeah, well, fuck that. We'll just go out and win. They don't want to go through a rebuild. Guys that are already in the NHL, they've one career. So, I think part of the record is that guy saying, yeah, I'll show you a rebuild, and we'll go out and play well. And the players will determine that. If you take an important piece away, and not in the sense like you're trying to tank, but you're taking away their ability to win games, I don't think that goes over well in the room.
And the thing is that, yes, we've only now for 6 months heard the term rebuild openly from them.
Yeah.
Pre Danny Briere, pre Dan Hilferty, pre Keith Jones, we never heard it from Chuck Fletcher, Dave Scott. That wasn't the mandate. But for all intents and purposes, have they not kind of been rebuilding since early 2022? Like, in a lot of ways, save for them.
This year too.
Yeah, like it's like since that trade deadline in 2022, when you traded Giroux for Tippett in a first round pick and Brassard for a fourth and Justin Braun for a third, they've kind of been rebuilding. And save for the Tony DeAngelo acquisition, which was just ludicrous in hindsight, they've only made moves that like a rebuilding team would make. So they've already had the ball rolling in this direction. And that's why, like, it's not a traditional rebuild where you have to gut the team down to the studs and rebuild it, because a lot of good young players were already here. Bobby Brink was already here. Noah Cates was already here. Morgan Frost was already here. Tyson Forster was already here. Cam York was already here. Emil Andre's already here. Urson's already here. Like, for all the bad that Chuck Fletcher did, and there was a lot of it, they drafted very, very well given what they had to work with.
Mm-hmm.
For a team that was remaining competitive, they drafted pretty damn well. And I think that's a big reason as to why Brent Flair is still here, because that they've done very well in that department since 2019. I think when we heard rebuild, it was changing the faces of the team and the philosophy of the team more so than just gutting the entire roster. Now, they need high-end talent. We know that.
And
But
they have it in Gauthier and Michkov too. The two best prospects aren't even over in North, aren't even here yet.
Yeah,
Two best young
exactly.
players.
So, I mean, I don't think this has to be like you have to always tear it down to the studs like a Arizona or an Ottawa. And look at Ottawa. They ripped it completely down. They drafted really, really well. You look back at the 2020 draft, I think they had the 3rd overall pick and the 5th overall pick, and they probably at today have the 2 best players in that draft in Stützle and Jake Sanderson.
Yeah.
And they're still not close to the playoffs. And a lot of people like to use the Rangers model as their rebuilding model as the way that the Flyers should look to. And look, I'm not comparing Sean Walker to Jacob Trouba, but they traded a lot of assets to bring in a Jacob Trouba and kind of fast track that rebuild and be that second pair right shot guy. Now, again, Sean Walker isn't Jacob Trouba. Walker's 4 years older than Jacob Trouba was. But sometimes it doesn't hurt to add to a rebuild while you're still trying to advance it along at a slower pace. And I don't think
block guys and not block young guys too.
Yeah, you're not going to block young guys. And look, I just throw out 3-4 year contract because if we're talking like a bonk type of deal, but if you want to keep Sean Walker and he still keeps up this play right through the season, why wouldn't he get a 3-4 year deal in free agency? Right shot defensemen are always coveted. They're always overpaid. That's why Erica Branson got a 4-year contract, or Risto got a 5-year contract, or David Savard got a 4-year contract. So it's a very interesting situation they're in with Walker because he could help them bridge the gap to their future top 4 right shot guy. But if he continues like that, they can maybe get a decent price for him at the deadline. But I just don't think it's a scenario where someone comes along with a 2nd round pick and only that, and you with your eyes closed just accept it, because I don't think that it would be maybe not even worth it to take it given the way that this team has played and the role that he's played on the team.
Yeah, we know Jonesy's talked about building the blue line too, and that's going to be a big thing. Yeah, I think sometimes people equate the word rebuild with sucking and losing. You rebuild, there's going to be losses that come with it, but you don't have to be a team that gets 55 standings points for it to be considered a rebuild. I think that, our world is full of extremes. You either agree with me completely or you vehemently disagree. The gap and living in the murky middle is not an area where a lot of people live. I got this email from a guy yesterday. His name's Paul, and he said, whatever happened to the rebuild? That was the subject. He said, ask Torts about whatever happened to doing the rebuild the right way. He said, sitting Morgan Frost for almost half the games so far isn't doing it the right way. It becomes personal for Torts. Happens with every team he's ever been with. Flyers will be stuck in the mud until Torts is gone. He said, Jonesy had me fooled. Looks like a used car salesman now. And look, they're not 13-3-1. They are 10-7-1. It's not like they're on this outlandish, points pace or anything like that. They've had a good start. They've won 5 straight games against 18 games in. But this notion, I don't know that Flyer fans know how to handle a rebuild because we've never knowingly handled a rebuild. They went that 5-year period without making the playoffs pre and into Lindros, but it's a different world now. And you see all these teams that suck for Bedard or, end up getting a Connor McDavid. But, accepting that losing thing to me is such a stain. Look at Buffalo again with this freaking Sabres team. They're 8-9-1. I mean, Jesus Christ, how long is this fucking rebuild going to go on in Buffalo? And Ottawa, they're on the treadmill of, hey, we have good players, but it doesn't result on the ice at all. It's crazy.
Look, it is easy to say just lose and tank in this, but I've used this example before, but I'll say it again. And I'm not comparing me to the NHL, but even if you're playing on a beer league team,
They plug in the scoreboard, Ant.
like like and you lose badly all the time, it causes such a bad vibe where like you just start to hate going to the rink and you hate playing and you hate the guys you're with. And yes, there's a big difference between a beer league and the NHL, but losing is so infectious. And when it goes on for so many years, it becomes worse and worse and
Debilitating.
worse and worse. And I think that the Flyers room was very infected post pandemic. And you know what? You could probably make the case that it should have been blown to smithereens when Hextall got moved on from before Fletcher came in and was tasked with saving the Hextall plan. And momentarily, it looked like it was possible in that first year of AV and BNF and Flyer and all that. But then post pandemic, it really reared its ugly head that it was too far gone. But there's a lot of holdovers from that. There's guys still here that were part of that. The Harts, the Sanheims, the Konechnys, Farabee, Morgan Frost kind of felt that as well. And I think that the rebuild, not as much about getting high-end talent because you need talent to win. You could have the best, headspace and the best attitude in the world, but if you don't have talent, it won't mean a thing. But I think more just under that was about changing the philosophy and changing, and I know it's been their buzzword for 2 years now, but the standard that you really had to change up the mindset here and just play hard and play to win every game. And look, I don't think John Tortorella is perfect. Like, I could give my thoughts on how he's handled Morgan Frost or some guys at times, but I can nitpick individual things that I've disagreed with him on, and he's far from perfect. And I'm sure that he'll tell anyone in hindsight that he's made mistakes. But all in all, I don't know how you can look at how he's coached this team for the last 13 months and not say, like, man, it is completely different than any other season that we've seen, with the slight exception of maybe 2 months under AV in 2019-20.
Yeah.
Aside from January, February of 2020.
Yeah.
I don't remember a team looking this well oiled probably since the days of Peter Laviolette. And I think that does count for something.
Yeah. And the thing is, too, if you want to ding them with the Frost handling, which we'll get into in a second, but you also got to go, okay, how has TK flourished under him, Konechny? How is now the tough love of last season? And I know he was really hard on Sanheim last season. How is that rearing? And how's that returning now? And then even Risto last year, the beginning of the season last year for Risto, those two were at ears all the time. And they got Risto to a place with his NHL game where he's not overrunning plays. He's playing with structure, and he had his best year. I wonder if that's going to be the case when he comes back, because he hasn't played yet this year. Do you have to go through that process again, or does Risto take from last year and that applies into this year and playing with that structure and discipline? But you can't go, well, he mishandled Frost, or you don't like the way he handled this situation, and not consider the other end of that, which is the success he's had with players. Let's talk about Frost, because he's played in 10 of the 18 games. Doesn't look like he's going to be back in tomorrow against the Islanders based on practice today. And just where is this going? The whole thing over the summer, his contract kind of strung out, and that can stress out an organization from time to time. Sometimes people get annoyed when a player in his situation it gets a drawn out negotiation. But he comes into this year and, he had a really good second half last year, but he just hasn't been able to build on it this year because he's just been so inconsistently out of the lineup.
Yeah, I think that there's blood on both sides here, or blame on both sides. And, if you go back to the contract negotiations, I think that it was a point where the players camp and the Flyers had two different opinions as to where the team was. And that came to the forefront while they were negotiating that contract. I do think that it's fair to say that Morgan Frost has taken this all in stride, and he's been a very good sport about it, and he's had a very good attitude. But I do think that maybe the player's agent has not helped the situation. I had heard that it was the player who eventually forced them to get a deal done before training camp because he didn't want to miss it. Look, I think that the Flyers have explored the market for Frost. I know at least two teams have kicked tires on him, but he's not a player that the Flyers are just going to give away for nothing. They don't need to. They have no reason to give him away for nothing, and they still are rebuilding. And he still is a guy that down the middle of the ice provides something that they don't otherwise have. Ryan Poehling, Sean Couturier, Scott Lawton, Noah Cates, none of those guys give the offensive creativity and upside that Morgan Frost does. So why would the Flyers just throw him away and potentially have them, with their foot in their mouth if he starts putting up 50 points like he was last season? Now, do I think that John Tortorella has been a bit too hard on Morgan Frost? Yeah, I do. Because given the uniqueness of the player's skill set to the rest of the lineup, I don't see why you wouldn't just ride with him as a top six center for the first 40 games or so. And then if he's really falling on his face, you take him out of the lineup. Just because I think we've seen in the past that he provides something that no one else does. At the same time, he's 4 points through 10 games. You're on pace for less than 40 points this year. I could kind of, if you prorate it over an 82 game stretch, I mean, I get that they're looking for more. I get that the underlying process only counts for so much for a player like Frost, and eventually you have to translate that into tangible points and tangible offense. So I get that as well, and I heard it again this morning that consistency is the big thing with Frost. That shift to shift or game to game, he could look like a different player in terms of his impact on the ice. But I also do understand that I don't understand why he's a guy that's so quick to be pulled out of the lineup when he makes a mistake. But we've seen it with other players too. Like look, Bobby Brink was the flavor of the week a few weeks ago when he scored his first 2 goals in the NHL. And then in short order, he was taken out of the lineup. But then he comes back in and he scores a goal. Maybe they're looking for that response from Morgan Frost. And to your point, you saw tough love on Travis Sanheim last year and look at how he responded. Tough love on Travis Konechny and look at how he responded. Even Joel Farabee. I think Joel Farabee's had a very quiet bounce back season after a very disappointing inaugural season under John Tortorella. Noah Cates has been demoted to the fourth line, and obviously Cates' skill set makes more sense as a 4C as opposed to Morgan Frost. So I think they're looking for that kind of explosive response from Morgan, and I think at times that they've got it, but it's just a consistency factor. But I also do think his lack of consistency coincides with his lack of consistency just in the lineup in general.
I think the other thing too is the human element of it. When a guy knows that the way it's gone so far this year, that if I'm not producing, I'm probably coming out of the lineup, it almost prevents him from producing and playing safe. Yeah. So it's kind of, one thing feeds the other and it's a vicious cycle, and it's hard to kind of break it. I thought that when Tippett came here and he got roster or lineup security, I'll call it, he knew he was going to be in the lineup. That's when he started to flourish and bring creative elements to his game. You saw his confidence grew. His decision-making on the ice became more dynamic. And he 27 goals last year. He's got 7 this year. I know you reported on Tippett about an extension because he is in the final year of his RFA contract. So what is the status of a Tippett extension? What would a Tippett extension look like? How's this play out?
Well, I think that the Tippett extension, what it will look like, is still up in the air. But I know that the Flyers are willing to go long-term with him. Now, look, I know Tippett's agency said that there was no truth to my report. That's fine. Agents do that all the time. I mean, I'm confident in my sources and my information, but I'll take it for now. And when an
agent putting out misinformation, what?
Yeah, I know. Frank Seravalli's dealt with this a bunch of times, so this was my first experience with it. But honestly, it just means I think I'm doing something right if they're taking the time to try and discredit it. But that's neither here nor there. They had talks in the summer. I have it on good authority that at the time the Tippett camp was, suggesting a $7 million AAV. I don't think that is the case anymore. I know that the Flyers will probably start with a 5.5 AAV, maybe a Travis Konechny type of average annual value. And I do think it's something that the Flyers would like to go longer term with Tippett. I think that given his age, given how he's played under John Tortorella, how he's adapted to the left side, and now that, he had a slow start, much like he did last year, he's starting to find his groove. And if you could get him like, to me, it seems like that $6 million range is kind of like where this will end up, assuming it's a long-term deal. If we're talking 6, 7, 8 years. Now, that maybe isn't something that the player wants to tie himself up into. Maybe the player wants to go 3, 4 years. So in that case, are we looking at more of like a $4 million AAV? A 4x4 type of contract maybe is more advantageous for the player. So then he could have another kick at the can when he's still in his theoretical prime. Yeah. So because if you buy up years of UFA, it's going to cost you more money. And as I put in my report 2 weeks ago, like I look at that Valeri Nichushkin contract that he signed 2 years ago or a year and a half ago with the Colorado Avalanche, and he left money on the table coming off of a big year of 52 points in 62 games, $6.125 million, and the cap is going up now as well. So I think that $6 to $6.25 million is how I see this going if they do in fact go longer term with Tippett. But if the player prefers to go shorter term, then it kind of means an entire different negotiation tactic, and you'd probably look at the $4 million range. But I know a lot of people are hesitant and trepidatious to go long term with a guy who probably projects to be a long-term second liner on this team, because the Flyers still haven't sorted out their top line. What's going to become a Gauthier? What's going to become a Michkov? Who's going to be a center? This, that, and the other thing. TK, his impending or his looming extension. What will happen there? But I think they like the player enough to be willing to commit to him longer term as long as the AAV is right. And to me, I think that $6 million range is something that would be probably fair for all sides.
And the thing with him is he's will be a arbitration eligible restricted free agent after the season. So he's obviously not a total free agent. And so they do have some control here. You never wanted to go to the arbitrator, but we'll see how that plays out. Yeah, TK's will be in the final year of that deal next year at 5.5. But, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out when it comes to Tippett as well. And what's the latest on the Team Canada investigation? I know we saw that there's an appeal, a 3-person appeal panel now looking at it or something.
Yeah, it seems like whenever you think that it's going to be resolved or you're going to get some kind of resolution on it, it just keeps going. The latest I've heard is that right now nothing's happening. That's the latest as of this morning. Is this
just going to disappear at some point? I mean, are we getting to that point?
It seems like it, because this has been going on for 2 years. And, I had somebody tell me that, this was something that was hanging over Chuck Fletcher's head when he was writing the show. And like Chuck was always super stressed about it. And he was looking for goaltending options. And, the first year goes by, and then last season goes by, and now we're into this year. And at a certain point, you have to just start kind of operating as if that this isn't going to be a thing. Now, obviously, given the magnitude of it and the real life aspects to it, and it be going so far beyond hockey being such like a secondary issue in such a horrific event like this. But after a certain point of you're going north of 24 months, you kind of just have to be like, okay, well, we have to operate like it's not a thing and that nothing will come of it. Because we thought, and myself included, I think Frank Saravalli thought that there was going to be a resolution sometime during the summer. Yeah. But now we're almost into December. And eventually, especially everyone thinks of Carter Hart when we talk about this situation. But, I mean, he's a pending RFA. He doesn't have a contract next year. I think that the Flyers are still listening, or willing to listen on him, I should say. They negotiated a lot with teams over the summer. And I think that negotiations would have gotten a lot more serious had it not been for the Hockey Canada thing. So it's going to be a very, very interesting few months as we get closer to the trade deadline, and more so July 1st, as Hart needs that new extension, because I don't think it's a lock that he's a long-term guy on this team.
Yeah, I mean, and then you look at it, I know a lot of people in particular last year were saying, well, trade Hart, get a haul, and then make Sam Ersson the number one. Look, Ersson, I think he started to play better of late. I don't know what ultimately his role will be in the NHL, if it'll be, bona fide, legit top 12 goalie in the league starter, or if it's serviceable NHL player. I can't go there yet. I haven't seen enough of him to know yet. And it's going to take some time with him in a backup position because he's not getting a ton of games. What I know about Hart is he's playing unbelievable. And to me, I mean, he's one of the top goalies in the league. He's kind of, when you look at goaltenders, you go, what you're going to get out of him pretty much night in and night out. And Kolosov's still a little ways away. Obviously, Bjarnason and the other Russian that they took this summer way off. Kolosov doing really well in the KHL, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you handle this, but you're right. He's the arbitration eligible RFA after this year. And how does that affect any negotiate? Is it a little 3-year deal that you do, or that makes them easier to move? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is here, but here's what I do know: that the goaltending position is paramount in this league. Always has been, always will be. And just taking this assumption that, we'll put Ersson in there, he'll be our starter. I don't know if to me, there's a lot of risk there from a hockey standpoint.
There is, and especially if you maybe want to take a step next year. Like, is 24-25 another rebuilding season? Like, this is year 2 already, and you're seeing how much tangible progress has already been made. Do you want to go in with, uncertainty between the pipes?
Yeah, big question mark in net. Oof.
Yeah, question mark in net when maybe your goal is to at least sniff the playoffs, Like, who knows? Like, this year, their goal there is no goal. It's just to develop their kids. And if they make the playoffs, great. And if not, no, who cares? But if your goal maybe next season is to make the playoffs and you have that uncertainty between the pipes, then what happens? Now, look, obviously, everyone knows what's going on in Edmonton and the absolute train wreck that's going on up there.
Holy.
Like, Jack Campbell in the minors, I think he has an 819 save percentage with Bakersfield.
0-3. Yep.
0-3. Like, that's been a disaster. They lose again last night. They called on Hart in the summer. They checked in on Swayman in the summer. I heard today that they kicked tires on Spencer Knight. They keep circling back for Montreal. Like, will it be, Jake Allen? Is that like an option? That's just more patchwork in my opinion.
Agreed.
There is a tie between Hart and their new CEO of hockey operations, Jeff Jackson. Jeff Jackson is a former colleague of Carter Hart's agent. They have yet to reach out on Carter Hart. I don't know if it's completely because of Hockey Canada. And, their former CEO is the former head of Hockey Canada, Bob Nicholson. So maybe that's bad PR that Edmonton doesn't want to touch. But as things get desperate and more desperate in Edmonton, as they continue to try and find ways to keep Connor McDavid happy, with his agent becoming the CEO, his OHL coach becoming the head coach, do they make a desperate move? And Elliot Friedman on the Jeff Merrick show today said that they're weighing options internally, that they may have to make a trade that they know that they're losing in the long term just to try and right this ship.
Yeah.
And I know that the Flyers would entertain taking back a Jack Campbell. It's not ideal. I know that they don't like that contract. But, I mean...
Yeah, if he's got Draisaitl attached to his hip. I'm not going like RNH to take on the Jack Campbell contract's got 5 years left.
3 years beyond this.
3 years beyond this one?
Yeah.
Ugh.
So it's $5 million. Now, look, if you could get Jack Campbell from Toronto, then you could do loads of work than an Urson Jack Campbell pairing. But what's the price? Yeah. Like, and this is completely spitballing. This is not anything I've heard, because they haven't even talked in months, the Flyers and the Oilers. There's been no discussion, so it's just complete spitballing. But, like, if they come at you and they say, okay, well, it starts with 2 first-round picks and Dylan Holloway, and then we'll only tack onto that to bring in Hart and dump Jack Campbell.
Can you?
I don't know what the
pain on Campbell. Do they ever?
Maybe, but they're so up against the cap.
Yeah,
and they're gonna have to hand Hart, I would imagine,
that's the other part,
$6 million.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the other part. Like everybody assumes because of the importance of the goaltending position that you get a haul in return for it. I don't know that you get a haul in return for it because the team is going to have to pay him because his contract is expiring, and goaltending just doesn't get the haul in trades. It's funny because when goaltending goes to free agency, they get paid, but in trades, teams don't get a huge response. Like you look at the year, Markstrom got signed, and Cam Talbot when he went to Minnesota, and those guys all got paid, but it doesn't seem to create the haul in trade value. It's weird.
I think that Edmonton is, and I do agree with you because I think that Ryan Miller trade from 2014 was something that scared off a lot of teams when St.
Yeah.
Louis went after him, and that was their big free trade deadline acquisition, and then they lost in the first round. And since then, we haven't really seen goalies go for much via trade. But Edmonton is in such a unique situation and such a desperate situation, and there's a lack of goaltenders who could solve it. Like they're a crap defensive team. This isn't just bad goaltending.
If I'm Harder, I don't want to go home to play behind it.
Yeah. So obviously Jeremy Swayman is the only option in my mind that could be a comparable addition to Hart because he's still young. He's played well. He has some upside. He could be a goaltending for the foreseeable future. I don't think Spencer Knight is there yet. I think obviously he's dealt with off-ice issues and he hasn't played to the same level as Hart and Swayman. But, are you going to not pay for Hart, pay out the nose for Hart while simultaneously dumping Jack Campbell and just go out and acquire Jake Allen? Is Jake Allen going to be the solution to Edmonton's problems?
Yeah, that's putting a Band-Aid on a shotgun wound with Jake Allen.
And if this was a team that was otherwise even average defensively, I would say go get Jake Allen. He's a good enough goalie that he could play behind. He could be
outscore him. Yeah.
Yeah, let's say Cam Talbot. Cam Talbot's having an amazing season in LA, but they're a super sound defensive team.
Yep.
He's a good system goalie. But I don't think going out and getting Jake Allen, while he may be an upgrade on a Skinner or Jack Campbell, is that going to move the needle?
No.
I think that you may just have to bite the bullet and pay out the nose for Carter Hart or Jeremy Swayman. But given where the Bruins are at organizationally, I don't see them being in a position to listen on Jeremy Swayman, and they can't take back Jack Campbell. Like I said, I think that they sniffed around on Spencer Knight, but I don't think that those conversations went anywhere. And my hypothesis as to why is because of Jack Campbell. You still have to move that money. Because you're going to have to
commit that much money to the position. You just can't. Not when you're paying Connor McDavid 15% of your cap right now, and Draisaitl 10%.
But the Flyers are in a position where the Oilers, it would come at a hefty cost, and maybe on paper it'd be an overpayment. But I do think that they could kill two birds with one stone because I don't think the Flyers ideally want to take on Jack Campbell, but they're able to take on Jack Campbell. And I think they would if the price was right. And they have a goalie that is a franchise goalie, in my opinion. Now, are the Oilers, who are now under the tutelage of Jeff Jackson, obviously Ken Holland is still the general manager, but it's the Jeff Jackson show out there, and Holland is a lame duck GM without a contract beyond this year.
Yeah, and not making any more decisions.
So, is this the point where Jeff Jackson, who was maybe presumably brought in to make Connor McDavid happy, going to say I don't give a damn about first round picks. I don't give a damn about former first round picks. We need a goalie here at all costs. Because when is the last time that Edmonton had a legitimate rock solid number one goaltender? Dwayne Rollison?
Yeah, could be.
Cam Talbot had a good year or two.
Yeah, he had a decent run there, but yeah, it may be Rolly to goalie.
Yeah, before that, probably Tommy Salo.
See, here's the deal, though. To me, that team, if you can improve the team defensively, the goaltending will follow. No goalie is going to succeed. That structure and the way they defend is going to drag every goalie with it. It just is. It's just they have no depth on the team, and their structure is shit. And I think they're just going to drag any goalie down with it. Carter Hart included, Jeremy Swayman. I think Boston should trade Linus Ullmark instead of Swayman, but that's just me. So who knows? But I don't see how it can work. And Stuart Skinner, like that, what a bad environment for him to be growing in the NHL, right?
Because I think
Ugh.
he's a decent enough goalie too.
I do too. But like that, again, that environment's just going to damage him. He's just going to you get shelled there. And ultimately, all those times that the red light goes off, it will affect a goalie. Now he's 25. He's not like he's 21 or anything, but still, oof. I don't know.
And
I don't know what they do.
theoretically, you would just want like a Jack Campbell, or not Jack Campbell, a Jake Allen, right? Like that would be a good partner for Stuart Skinner. But
Yeah, if you did a defense like Vegas.
yeah, exactly. But is it easier to just go out and pay through the nose for a goalie and just try and solve it that way, or try and replace 2-3 guys on your back end?
Yeah.
Like Darnell Nurse is being paid north of $9 million, but I think he's a $7.5 million defenseman.
Yeah, that's criminal.
Like, I mean, and I think just like
Full
Darnell
no move.
Nurse, yeah, full no move. Evan Bouchard, who I really like as a player, has been putrid this year. Cody Ceci playing in a top 4 capacity. Like Philip Broberg hasn't lived up to his first round pedigree. Like it's messed up there. And then to your point, your offensive depth is non-existent. You bring in a Connor Brown who had a history with Connor McDavid in Erie, who I used to like as a player, but obviously has dealt with injuries here. And his contract is structured in a way on performance bonuses. So it may result in dead cap space next year if he hurts a certain level. Like it's a really shitty situation out there. And I just wonder how desperate they'll get.
Yeah.
But even as desperate as you get, you still have to find a taker for Jack Campbell. If you're going to make a significant addition, like Jack Campbell's contract has to go out the door.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm just waiting for them to call Philly. Like I was speaking to someone today and he said like they're idiots for not calling Philly yet.
Yeah.
Because they could kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that Philadelphia is willing to weaponize their cap space. So, and again, this is like, it's like, I know Philly's waiting for it. So I don't know if it's just Hockey Canada related or because that they don't want to pay out the nose for Carter Hart while simultaneously jettisoning Jack Campbell.
Yeah, I'm going to sneak into the office there and put a block on any calls from Edmonton. I don't want any part of that Jack Campbell contract. None. And to lose Hart on top of it, I'll pass. But we'll see where it goes. I mean, they got Matthias Ekholm, $6 million, 33 years old too. I mean, geez.
And he was like a saving grace last year.
Yeah.
For that back end and for Evan Bouchard.
Maybe he can play goalie.
Just tape him like Goldberg in the Mighty Ducks. Tape him to the net.
Yeah, get some old Mylac plastic shin pads on them and stuff them in there, right? Gee, this is bananas. That's a team. You think that when Draisaitl's up after next year or McDavid's up in 2 years after this, that either of those players leave? Because if they're going to leave, Edmonton's got to trade them. They can't just let them walk for nothing.
I mean, I imagine they'll find a way to keep those guys.
I bet McDavid walks. I bet you he's going to get out of there.
I think he's pissed off. That's why I'm assuming that they're going to do anything to get this team right.
And I just don't know that they can, Ant. I mean, they're eating up such a huge percentage of the cap. I don't know you can win in today's league when you're paying, 3 or 4 guys the kind of dough that they are. I mean, you look at McDavid, 12.5. What is Draisaitl? 8.7-ish? And then 9.5 for Darnell Nurse. Like, how can you build a team when you're committing all that cap space to those guys?
Well, I'm looking at it now, like
8.5 for Draisaitl.
8 which is probably one of the best value contracts in the league.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
But it's just money that was allocated to the wrong guys. Like, and you have, CC, like when you have Brett Kulak, who I do like as a defenseman, almost $2.75 million on your third pair, CC at 3.25. Bouchard at 3.9. Like for me, it's just Darnell Nurse making $9.25 million, and he's not a $9.25 million defenseman. Ekholm, I think it depends on, and Nashville did retain salary on that, but I mean, he's not part of the problem there. It's after you get beyond the top 5 forwards, and Nugent Hopkins hasn't been close to what he was last year, but when you get to like Fogle, McLeod, Ryan, Brown, Ernie, Gagne, like that's when it starts to get rough.
Yeah.
And when you have McDavid, who's presumably playing hurt, and Draisaitl a step behind of what he usually is at, it's a tough look. It's a tough look.
They ain't making the playoffs, and if they win the fucking lottery, I'm gonna flip out.
Imagine.
Imagine, right? Last thing, William Nylander. I mean, the price just keeps going up, 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 and I mean, how can Toronto? I mean, they're gonna have to go north of 11 million, I would think. Can you commit that with what you've already got committed up front? But also, how can you lose it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, like before the season, I thought like 9.5 was where he would fall.
Yeah.
That the Timo Meyer deal, I think Meyer was 8.8, would kind of like cap Nylander at 9.5. But the way he's playing right now, it's a minimum 10, if not more, with the cap going up. And then you're going to be a year away from having to sign Mitch Marner. The only thing here that helps is that you're a year and a half away from John Tavares' contract expiring.
Yeah.
And you would imagine that his average annual value will get cut at least probably in half. You know, he's making 11 million now. Yeah. He probably goes down to the 5 range, I would say, but he's still a very productive player in his own right. So you can't sell him too short.
Even at 33.
Even at 33. So, I mean, if they could find, but then you have Mitch Marner, who he's at a smidge under 11 million right now. He's probably going to get bumped to 12 million, I would say. And this is all just me spitballing here, but
and because they're pending UFAs, they're not restricted. This is UFA territory.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if they could find maybe a way to make it work for a year, then I think that you could get away with paying Nylander $10.5, $11 million just for next year, because then a lot will get shifted around when Tavares his deal is up. But I mean, when you're paying your 4th line center $2.4 million, that's it's rough. And you know, their defense is so uncertain beyond Morgan Rielly. Like they have nobody signed beyond 2025. Yeah, Brody's pending UFA. Klingberg's been a mess. Yeah, Giordano's the oldest player in the league.
Jesus. That's insane. Yeah, they're D guys. Rielly is 29. Brody 33, Klingberg 31, going on 52. McCabe 30, and Giordano 40. That's insane.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So it's going to be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah. How these names shake out with Nylander, Marner, Draisaitl, McDavid over the next couple of years is going to be fascinating. Well, we've certainly said a lot, Ant. Yeah. What's up on thefourthperiod.com?
Well, my last piece was on Owen Tippett. Probably going to have one come out tomorrow or sometime this week in regards to maybe touch on Sean Walker, Carter Hart, and obviously a very not dull time, but a quiet time of year in terms of transactions and trades and all that. But no, I think it's going to start picking up here. And obviously I'm doing more league-wide stuff. Probably have some more interviews coming down the pike soon.
All right. We'll check all that out at thefourthperiod.com. Make sure you follow Anthony at ademarco25. And we'll be back next week. We promise. We're not going back on sabbatical. There's been a lot to talk about. We got to a lot in this episode, and it was good to catch up, and we'll get back after it again coming up next week. So everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Leave us a 5-star rating and review, and we shall talk to you next time on Stick to Hockey Live. Have a great